Okay guys, the last video for this unit, we're going to talk about the physiology of digestion. We're not going to go into a whole lot of detail in this unit, but we'll go through it relatively quickly. Before we really get into what happens, let's keep in mind that a lot of our chemical digestion is going to depend on enzymes. Now, we've already discussed enzymes earlier in this course, so we know they're proteins. We know that they help speed up the rate of a chemical reaction. They don't get changed during that reaction, so they're able to go and do that reaction over and over and over again as long as the conditions are optimal. So in our case, when we're talking about digestion, we're mostly talking about breaking things down. So that's going to be catabolic reactions. So we have enzymes in our digestive system that help split fats, that help break down proteins, that help break down carbohydrates, that help break down nucleic acids, and so on and so forth. So a lot of our chemical digestion is going to depend on enzymes and where they're located and what they do when our food arrives to meet them. We should also keep in mind that how important water is in these processes. Most of the time when enzymes are working and they break down something, they usually use that by adding a molecule of water. So when they break that down and by using water, the process is called hydrolysis. And if we look at the word hydrolysis, the first part of course is going to be hydro, and that always refers to water. And the second part is going to be lysis, which we know means to split. So splitting with water is hydrolysis or hydrolysis. So water is going to be needed in digestion for both the chemical, working with the enzymes to split the molecules that we need, but it's also going to be required for physical movement. We have to move the food through the digestive system, and in order to do that, it needs to be lubricated so that we don't damage any of the tissues. So water will go a long way to help produce mucus, which is going to help us move those molecules through the digestive system. So in the run of a day, our digestive system will use about 7 liters of water in total. Most of that's going to be recycled, so we'll use it again. But in order for us to have healthy functional metabolism, we need to drink about 2 liters of water a day in order to keep up with this rate. Okay, let's have a look at the actual process of digestion now. So when we first take a bite of something, we put food into our mouth, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to chew that up with our teeth. So that mastication, of course, that's the first part of physical digestion. That's where we physically break molecule or food into smaller and smaller bits and pieces. And the idea behind that, of course, is to increase surface area as much as we can so that there's lots of room for our enzymes to work on that particular bit of food, whether it be fat or carbohydrate or protein, whatever it is. If more and more of that's exposed, so we've got smaller and smaller pieces, the quicker we can have our enzymes work on it, and the quicker we can digest it. Now, as we're doing that, of course, we're going to have saliva in our mouth. That's going to help lubricate our food, but there's also enzymes in saliva. So if we look here, we've got an enzyme. We know it's an enzyme because if you look at the last 3 letters of the word, it's going to be ASE. Almost all enzymes end in the letters ASE. So if you see something that has ASE at the end of it, it's probably going to be an enzyme. If we look at the front, well, we'll look at the front, we've got amyl. So amyl always refers to starch. So salivary amylase is an enzyme produced by the salivary glands that helps break down starch. Okay, so this gets excreted into our mouth, and we combine that with our food as we're chewing, and the first part of chemical digestion is going to happen right in our mouth, because any starch molecule, so if we eat bread or grains, rice, potatoes, anything like that, then those salivary amylase molecules are going to start breaking down the starch molecules even before you swallow. Now, after you swallow, the food travels through the pharynx, it goes into the esophagus, travels down to the stomach. The stomach is going to be a very different environment than what your mouth was, or the esophagus. The stomach is going to have hydrochloric acid in there, and it's going to bring the pH way down. So we're going to see a very low pH, and that means the stomach is very acidic. And we have an enzyme in the stomach called pepsin. Now this is one that's a bit different, doesn't have the A's on the end of it, but pepsin is a enzyme that breaks down proteins. So we call that a protease. protease is a category of enzymes that breaks down proteins. So our pepsin is going to break down any meat that gets down into our digestive system. So chicken or beef or fish, that's going to be starting to chemically digested by the pepsin and the hydrochloric acid that we find in our stomach. Now the stomach also produces an enzyme, another enzyme called lipase. Now again, the ASE at the end, so lipase, and then LIP in this case is going to refer to lipids. So lipase is an enzyme that's going to help break down lipids or fats. So this is going to happen in the stomach. So when the food gets in the stomach, it mixes with the hydrochloric acid, it mixes with those enzymes that are there, and the stomach's got that third muscle layer. It's going to churn and move and swish stuff around. And once it does that, we call the food then, we call it chyme. So the chyme is going to be moved from the stomach into the duodenum of the small intestine. So that's the first part of the small intestine. The small intestine is going to produce buffers. It's going to produce some enzymes in order to prevent that stomach acid, the low pH hydrochloric acid, from damaging the tissues that are in the small intestine. Also, in the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, we're going to have all those enzymes that are secreted by the pancreas. Now, the pancreas secretes a number of enzymes: lipases, amylases, trypsin. Trypsin is another enzyme similar to pepsin in that it breaks down proteins. It's another protease enzyme. And we're also going to have nucleases. Now, I'm not going to explain what that is. You can tell by the ASE at the end what kind of molecule it is, and then look at the front part, and then you guys can figure out what a nuclease is. So those enzymes are going to break down all the fats, starches, proteins, and of course the nuclear material. So nucleases are going to break down nucleic acids. All that stuff is going to be broken down in the first part of the small intestine. And then also a big part of what's going to happen then, once we start breaking stuff down, is we need to absorb all those things back into our bloodstream so that we can use the nutrients and the energy that we got from ingesting that food. Now, the pancreas also secretes a large portion of sodium bicarbonate. And sodium bicarbonate is going to act as a buffer. It's going to help neutralize that really acidic chyme that came from the stomach, because we don't want to have a really acidic juice rolling around through our digestive system, because such a low pH can really damage tissues. So having the protection from the small intestine and the pancreas right there, it certainly helps a lot to prevent any damage to the small intestine. Now, at that point, the liver is also going to secrete bile. Now, bile will move into the small intestine, and it will help emulsify fats. And emulsifying fats means help breaking them down a little bit, making them a little bit more readily usable. By breaking down those fats, we turn the fats into smaller and smaller molecules, and then by then the lipase can work on them, and then the products of those, usually glycerol and fatty acids, those are readily absorbed, and that's something that our body can work with a lot easier than large chunks of fat or lipids. So once we've broken all that down, now we need to absorb it. We need to get it into our body systems, through our digestive system, so that we can make use of the food that we ate. The primary portal, or where most of the absorption is going to happen, is through the villi that are in the small intestine. And we looked at a cross section of these villi before, and you guys know that there's going to be a capillary in each one of those tiny villi. So an arteriole and a venule, and those capillaries are really porous, so stuff can get in and out quite easily. So simple sugars, small proteins, amino acids, some simple fatty acids, all of these things are going to pass through the epithelial layer of the intestines and then pass into the blood, in through the capillaries. And that's going to be fine. That's how we absorb stuff. That blood is then going to travel to the liver through the hepatic portal vein, like we talked about in the cardiovascular unit. Now, inside each one of those villi, not only are we going to have a capillary, but we're also going to have a lacteal. Now, the lacteal is a lymphatic capillary. Remember back when we talked about the lymphatic system. So large, complex fats, they can't pass readily into the bloodstream. Okay, they have to find a different way in order to enter into our systems, and the way they do that is to enter through the lymphatic capillaries or through the lacteal. it's easier for them to enter through the lacteal because it's impossible for them to enter into the blood. So that's how a lacteal helps that third process, that third function of the endocrine or the lymphatic system, and that's the absorption of fats. Now the second portal of absorption, where the second most absorption occurs, is in the large intestine. Now the large intestine is not so much for absorbing nutrients, it's more or less for compacting waste and making it as efficient as possible. A big part of absorption in the large intestine is going to be to absorb water. We want to take as much water out of our waste as possible because we want to use that water again. Some vitamins will get absorbed in the large intestine. Vitamin K and some B vitamins are absorbed here, and that's because we've got bacteria in the large intestine that help us produce those vitamins. So that's where they're produced, and that's where they get absorbed. Now, controlling digestion. Digestion needs to be properly timed. We need to have our food in our stomach for the right amount of time in order for us to break the food down as good as we can. It needs to pass through the small intestine and the large intestine at a regular rate so that we can remove as much stuff, we can absorb as much stuff as possible. And in order to do that, we have neurological control, so feedback controls that help let the nervous system know how fast to move stuff through our digestive system, when to slow it down, when to speed it up, and so on. And we also have hormonal control. Now, don't worry too much about the hormones here. Just know that the regulation of our digestion is controlled by neurological and hormonal. So there's two systems that help control the rate of our digestion. The last topic for this unit is going to be some disorders of the digestive system, and as you can imagine, there's going to be a lot. Okay, we talked about several different organs. We talked about a lot of accessory organs. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong with the digestive system just because there's a lot of factors that are involved there. So we can have things such as eating disorders like anorexia nervosa, which is a problem people have maintaining weight or eating correctly. We can have peritonitis, which is going to be inflammation of the peritoneum, so the membrane that surrounds the guts. There's a lot of different diseases we can have in our mouth. We can have tooth loss, for example. That's going to be a problem for digestion. Again, we've talked about the word itis before. If we see itis at the end of a word, that's generally a negative thing. Itis usually means an infection. And if we look at the front here, gingiva means the soft tissue around the teeth, the gums. So gingivitis is an inflammation of the gums. Then we can look down and we can see that you can have disorders of the stomach, the esophagus. We can have ulcerations. So this is an area in the gastrointestinal tract, the digestive tract, where we get tissue destroyed. And it can be quite painful. It can cause internal bleeding. It can be a pretty serious infection, secondary infection, so they usually need to be looked after by a doctor. You can have intestinal disorders such as inflammation, irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, Crohn's, or even obstruction. Obstruction would mean a blockage of the intestinal tract. The liver is subject to several diseases as well, including cirrhosis, hepatitis, again, an infection of the liver, and numerous neoplasms. Don't forget what neoplasms are. On top of that, we can have pancreatitis, which is an infection or inflammation of the pancreas, and gallstones, which are when we have formation of calcium deposits in the gallbladder, and it prevents the bile from being secreted from the gallbladder into the small intestine. And that's the end of the unit on digestion.